Ava noticed the laughter before she saw him. It sliced through the low murmur of the restaurant, bright and careless, the sound of a man with nothing to lose. For a moment she thought, no, that can't be Ethan. Her husband didn't laugh like that in public. Not anymore. Not with her. Then she turned, dress hugging the soft curve of her waist, curls piled into a crown on top of her head, and there he was, sitting at a corner table under the chandelier light like a man in a magazine spread. White shirt crisp, jaw clean-shaven, blue eyes bright. And leaning into him, hand resting on his shoulder like she'd paid for the right, was the woman he'd told her not to worry about. If you've ever walked into a room and realized you were the last one to know your own life had changed, this is your story. And as you listen, if something in you whispers, "That's me," don't keep it to yourself. Breathe with me. Stay with me until the end. Share this with the woman who's shrinking herself to fit into a man's story. Like, comment, follow, because we're building a place where no one has to heal alone. The maitre d' was saying something. Right this way, Ms. Robinson. But the words floated past Ava like smoke. All she could hear was Ethan's laugh and the sharp, bright sound of Sloane's voice. The restaurant was one of those places you only saw on lists. Exposed brick washed in warm light, marble tables, waiters gliding like ghosts with plates that looked like art instead of food. On a Tuesday night in downtown Chicago, every seat was filled with people who believed they were important. Tonight, Ava was supposed to be one of them. Ethan had said it with that impatient affection he used when he wanted her to just cooperate. Babe, it's not a big deal. Casual dinner with some people from the firm. You've been saying you want to see my world more, right? She had spent an hour getting ready after a full day at the high school, guiding teenagers through panic attacks and family breakups. Her feet ached, her inbox overflowed, but she'd still stood in front of the mirror and told herself, it matters. It matters that you show up. It matters that he sees you trying. So she had chosen the dark green dress that made her brown skin glow and her shoulders look like they belonged in a painting. She had twisted her coils into a soft updo, gold hoops catching the light at her ears. She looked like a woman ready to step into a life she'd been promised. And now, watching Ethan lean closer to Sloane, his hand resting on the back of her chair, Ava felt that life tilt. Not explode, not shatter. Tilting is worse. It means you see the fall coming, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. He noticed her then. The path from the entrance to his table couldn't have been more than 10 steps, but it felt like a runway of judgment. Heads turned. Men glanced, then looked back at their wine. Women looked longer, scanning her dress, her hair, the brown of her skin next to the paleness of Ethan's. Ava held her chin high. Years of her grandmother's voice rose up inside her. Don't ever let them see you bow. Ava, Ethan said, standing up so slowly it felt like reluctance. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Annoyance? And then he smoothed it away with the easy charm he wore like a tailored suit. You made it, as if she were late. As if she hadn't arrived exactly at the time he'd texted. He stepped around the table and placed a light kiss on her cheek, the kind you give a distant cousin at a reunion. His cologne was familiar, but on him tonight it smelled like a stranger. This is Sloane, he said, turning to the woman who still hadn't moved her hand from his chair. Sloane Hartman, she's kind of the brain behind half of our strategy team. Sloane stood, smile already in place. She was stunning in that careful way that happens when someone knows exactly how much power their face has. Blonde hair in loose waves, red dress that looked custom-made, expensive watch glinting at her wrist. She extended her hand. So nice to finally meet you, she said. Ethan talks about you. Finally, the word hooked itself into Ava's skin. Ava took her hand. It was cool, firm, practiced. Nice to meet you too, she replied, her voice steady. If your heart has ever been breaking while your voice refused to betray you, you know exactly how she sounded. They sat. Ethan slid back into his seat beside Sloane, not across from her. Ava took the chair across, the one with the worst angle, as if this triangle had been planned. The table was set with heavy silverware and crystal glasses that caught the light. The waiter appeared with a bottle of wine Ethan had already ordered. "For you," Ethan said to Sloane, as if they had done this before. Ava watched as he poured, hands steady, knuckles brushing Sloane's fingers. Nothing explicit, nothing you could screenshot and send to a lawyer. Just enough intimacy to make a wife feel like a stranger at her own husband's table. If you're listening to this and thinking, "I'd have flipped the table, I'd have dragged him out by his tie," you might be surprised by what really happens in moments like these. Sometimes humiliation doesn't make you explode. Sometimes it freezes you in place. You become hyper-aware of every eye in the room, every whisper that might or might not be about you, and you realize that one wrong move will turn your private heartbreak into entertainment. "So Ava," Sloane said, swirling her wine as if she'd been practicing for this scene. "Ethan mentioned you work in education?" "In mental health," Ava said. "I'm a therapist at Southside High, mostly trauma counseling." There was a pause, the slightest lift of Sloane's brows. "Wow, that's intense," she laughed lightly. "I don't know how you do it. I mean, I just want to take all those kids home with me." A compliment, technically, but something about the way she said, "those kids," made Ava's jaw clench. "Someone has to stay," Ava replied. "Not everyone gets to build an app and leave." Ethan chuckled, but it wasn't with her. It was the laugh of someone smoothing over an awkward moment at a networking event. "Ava's being modest," he said. "She's great with people. Honestly, she could be a killer organizational psychologist if she wanted. I keep telling her she's underutilizing herself." Underutilizing. Ava felt the word land like a weight in her chest. He'd said that at home, quietly, casually, while scrolling through his email. Hearing it here, in front of this woman, told her something very important. He had started practicing their private conversations in public without her consent. Sloane smiled, tilting her head. "Well, some people are just comfortable, I guess. There's nothing wrong with that. Comfortable, stagnant, underutilizing. None of them sharp enough to draw blood on their own. But together they formed a story, and Ava realized with a cold, creeping clarity, she was not the heroine in the version Ethan had been telling. She was the cautionary tale. The waiter came and went. Menus were opened and closed. Orders taken: steak for Ethan, salmon for Sloane, short rib for Ava because it was the first thing her eyes landed on. The conversation drifted to Ethan's latest project, phrases like market disruption and user acquisition spilling over the table like a second language. Ava watched him light up for Sloane in a way he hadn't for her in years. He leaned in when she spoke. He laughed before she finished her jokes. He touched her wrist once, twice, as if he'd forgotten Ava could see. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She didn't ask him what he thought he was doing. Instead, she did what so many women do when the ground opens beneath their feet. She performed. She smiled at the right moments. She asked Sloane questions about her work, the cities she'd lived in, the conferences she'd spoken at. She cheered for Ethan's wins like she hadn't been the one holding him together between failures. Inside, something was quietly tearing. If you've ever sat across from someone you love and realized they'd already left you long before they packed a bag, you know this feeling. The grief is not just for what you're losing now. It's for all the years you spent not seeing it. When Sloane excused herself to the restroom, Ethan finally looked directly at Ava. Really looked. For a second, she thought she saw the man she'd married, the one who used to bring her coffee at midnight during grad school, who used to brag about her work to anyone who would listen. "You okay?" he asked. It sounded more like a formality than concern. 1,000 answers flickered through her mind. No. How long? Why her? Why here? Why like this? Instead, she heard herself say, "Is this what casual looks like to you?" His jaw tightened. "Ava, don't start. This is work." She laughed, quietly. because the alternative was screaming. If this is work, Ethan, then what exactly is our marriage? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. In that silence, under the warm light and the clink of crystal, Ava finally understood. Tonight wasn't a mistake. It was a rehearsal. And she had just seen the first act of a story she refused to let finish without her rewriting the ending. Before the restaurant, before the whispering humiliation and the quiet cracking of her ribs around her heart, Ava Robinson had been a woman the world could feel entering a room. Not because she was loud, Ava had never needed volume to command space, but because she carried herself with the certainty of someone who knew where she came from. A certainty she didn't realize would one day be chipped away, not in one clean blow, but grain by grain, the way water hollows stone. Long before Chicago's skyline became the backdrop to her unraveling, Ava's world was shaped by the warm Georgia sun and the voice of her grandmother, Loretta May Robinson, a woman carved from faith, fire, and unshakable dignity. Loretta May raised Ava in a small brick house outside Atlanta, its walls lined with gospel records, framed Bible verses, and photographs of women who survived more than they ever spoke about. Ava learned early that strength wasn't loud. It was the quiet refusal to shrink. On Saturday mornings, while other kids watched cartoons, Ava sat at the kitchen table as her grandmother plaited her hair. Each pull and twist was a lesson. "Baby," Loretta May would say, fingers gentle but firm, "the world will try to tell you who you are. Don't ever hand them the pen. You hear me?" "I hear you, Grandma," little Ava would whisper, legs swinging, heart wide open. That house held the sound of belonging, a sound Ava didn't realize she'd lose until years later, sitting across from a man who once swore she was his home. In high school, Ava was the girl everyone trusted, but no one fully understood. She carried a sadness she didn't speak about, the quiet abandonment of a father who drove away one morning and never came back. But instead of hardening her, it deepened her. It sharpened her empathy into something powerful, something visible. Teachers saw it, counselors nurtured it, and when Ava stepped into her first psychology class at 16, the world rearranged itself. She wrote essays about healing that made adults cry. She volunteered at youth centers. She listened, really listened, to kids who had been silenced everywhere else. Her senior year journal, still tucked in a box in her closet, held a sentence she wrote in looping handwriting. "I want to be the person I needed at 13. And she became exactly that. College took her to Howard University, where she blossomed like a flower finally planted in the right soil. Surrounded by brilliant black women who walked with their heads high and their futures blazing, Ava found the version of herself she would later mourn, the one who wore color boldly, laughed loudly, and believed in possibilities without needing permission. She interned at clinics, led workshops on teen mental health, won awards she barely mentioned because her joy wasn't in the trophies. It was in the kids who said, "You made me feel seen." When she moved to Chicago for grad school, it was supposed to be temporary. A new city, a new chapter, another step toward the career she felt called to. But Chicago had a way of claiming you with its grit, its skyline, its rhythm. Ava found herself teaching, counseling, staying late after sessions because a 17-year-old girl needed someone to talk to before going home to chaos. Her colleagues said she had a gift. Her students said she saved lives. And Ava, before Ethan, believed she was doing what she was born to do. She lived alone then, in a cozy apartment with plants by the window and books stacked in uneven piles. She rode her bike along Lakeshore Drive on summer mornings, wind catching her curls, feeling like the city itself was cheering her on. She danced barefoot in her living room. She cooked spicy shrimp and listened to Nina Simone while grading papers. She dressed for herself, bright yellows, bold prints, natural hair that defied gravity and expectations. Women stopped her on the street to say, "Sis, your hair is everything." Men looked twice. But Ava never needed their approval. She was whole. Not perfect, whole. Rooted, steady, alive in a way she didn't realize would one day dim. Then came the first compromise, the first softened boundary, the first quiet apology for taking up space, not because she wanted less, but because she loved someone who convinced her that her fullness was too heavy to hold. And that is the tragedy of it, that Ava didn't lose herself all at once. She surrendered in whispers. One dream here, one priority there, one curl straightened, not because she wanted to, but because he preferred it sleeker. She thought it was partnership. She thought it was maturity. She thought this was what building a life with someone looked like. But the woman Ava used to be, the woman who rode her bike along the lake at sunrise, who braided her own hair with pride, who walked into classrooms like they were sacred, she had been fading long before the restaurant, long before Sloan, long before a laugh that didn't belong to her cut through the air. If you had seen Ava then, before the erosion, you would have understood why the breaking hurt so deeply. Because the fall is always hardest for those who once knew how to fly. Ethan Cole entered Ava's life the way thunder follows heat. Sudden, electric, and impossible to ignore. It was the night of a charity hackathon in downtown Chicago, an event meant to raise funds for community youth programs. Ava had volunteered as a mental health consultant, offering guidance to developers who wanted their apps to actually help the kids they claimed to serve. She wasn't expecting magic that evening. She wasn't even wearing the kind of outfit one imagines meeting a future lover in. Just jeans, a soft sweater, and her hair wrapped in a patterned scarf. But sometimes the universe doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it just shifts. Ethan found her near a table cluttered with laptops and energy drinks, where she was patiently explaining the difference between motivational quotes and real trauma-informed support. He stood a few feet away, listening longer than a stranger typically does. His posture was confident but relaxed, arms crossed loosely, expression curious. When she finally noticed him, he smiled the way men do in movies. Slow, intentional, a little too aware of its own charm. That, he said, nodding toward the flustered group of developers, was probably the smartest thing anyone said in this building tonight. Ava laughed, surprised at how warm the sound felt leaving her throat. I'm not sure they appreciated it. Oh, they did, he replied. They just don't know it yet. It wasn't the line that caught her attention. It was the way he said it, like he saw her value instantly, without needing a resume or a reason. At that point in her life, Ava wasn't used to being seen in full color. She was used to being useful, supportive, dependable. Ethan looked at her like she was extraordinary. They talked for 20 minutes that first night, about her work, about the students who broke her heart and the ones who put it back together, about the city, about the best coffee shops, about absolutely nothing and somehow everything. Ethan listened with an intensity that felt flattering and unfamiliar. He repeated her words back to her, little phrases she didn't expect him to remember. He asked questions like he genuinely wanted to understand the inside of her mind. He watched her the way people watch sunsets, not because they own the moment, but because they want to hold on to it as long as possible. It felt like connection. It felt like recognition. It felt like being chosen. Later, Ava would understand that some people don't listen to learn you. They listen to collect you, to gather your softness, your fears, your dreams, and store them like tools for later. But on that night, she just felt seen. Ethan asked her out the following week. A wine bar in Lincoln Park. She almost said no. Dating exhausted her, and he was the kind of man who felt like a risk. Handsome, polished, confident in a way that suggested he'd rarely heard no. But something about him disarmed her. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, or maybe it was the way he made her laugh without trying. He arrived early and stood when she walked in. He'd remembered she didn't drink red wine because it gave her headaches. He'd remembered the name of a student she'd mentioned in passing. He noticed when she nervously adjusted her bracelet and said, "You don't have to be anyone but yourself with me." How many women have fallen in love because someone gave them that sentence? He was charming, yes, but it was the gentleness that hooked her. the illusion of safety. The way he made her feel like she could put down her armor. On the third date, he told her, "You see people, Ava. Really see them. Most people go their whole lives without ever being understood. But you make people feel visible." She didn't know then that he'd studied that very light inside her, memorized its warmth, admired its brightness, only to one day figure out exactly how to dim it. The first red flags were subtle, so subtle she mistook them for quirks or insecurities. Ethan insisted on paying for everything, even when she wanted to split the bill. He teased her about how serious her job was, calling it noble but heavy. He complimented her natural hair, but suggested she straighten it for a more polished look at certain events. Nothing outrageous, nothing alarming, just gentle nudges that made her question herself in tiny increments. He met her friends and charmed them easily. Her best friend Naomi whispered afterward, "Girl, he is fine, and he is into you. Do not sabotage this." Even her mother, who guarded her daughters like a watchtower, said, "He seems stable, Ava, ambitious, kind." Ethan fit every box the world told her she should want. And maybe that was part of the danger, because when someone looks perfect on paper, you feel foolish questioning the things that pinch your spirit. He didn't storm into her life like a villain. He drifted in gracefully like a hero, like a man who could build a future with her. And in those early months, Ava didn't yet understand the truth about men like Ethan Cole. They don't steal your light. They study it, memorize it, fall in love with it, and then slowly, subtly, teach you to believe that the light was never yours to begin with. Ava used to believe that marriages unraveled in dramatic scenes. Doors slammed, voices raised, confessions hurled across rooms like glass. She didn't know that the most devastating kind of erosion was silent, almost tender in its subtlety. A soft wind, not a storm, wearing down stone. Their wedding was small, golden, intimate. A rooftop ceremony in the heart of Chicago, the skyline rising behind them like a witness. Ethan cried when he saw her. Not a delicate tear, an honest, shaking exhale, like she'd been the answer to a prayer he'd never dared speak aloud. Ava's grandmother had passed by then, but Ava felt her presence when the wind swept gently across her veil. That night, as they danced under string lights, Ethan whispered, "With you, everything feels possible." But promises are easy when the music is playing and the world is watching. The first year was sweetness poured into the cracks of their busy lives. They bought a narrow brick townhouse in a historic neighborhood, its creaking floors and uneven windows full of charm they swore they'd fix, but never did. They painted walls together, burned dinner together, fell asleep on the couch together. Ava was still Ava then, bright, steady, unafraid of her own joy. And Ethan adored her, or the version of her he thought she was. It started slowly. His job at the tech firm exploded with opportunity. Promotions, projects, leadership tracks. He thrived in that world, fast-paced, numbers-driven, loud with ambition. Ava was proud of him. She packed his lunches when he forgot, listened to his presentations, cheered when he landed contracts that paid more in bonuses than she earned in months. She believed in partnership. She believed in supporting the one you love. But while Ethan rose, something in Ava began sinking. At first, she didn't notice the shift. Ethan started working late, harmless. Weekend strategy sessions, normal for tech. Networking events, important for his career. She excused it all with grace because love, she believed, was flexible. Until flexibility became contortion. Until compromise became disappearance. Ethan stopped coming home for dinner. "Order something," he'd text. "Don't wait up." He stopped asking about her day. The kids she counseled, the breakthroughs she fought for. Too heavy for him after a long day, he said. Too much, too emotional, too draining. The things she treasured about herself became things he found exhausting. Then came the comments disguised as concern. "You should come to the gym with me, just to stay healthy. That dress is a little bold for this event, don't you think?" You're intense sometimes. You don't always have to fix everyone. Little slices, not enough to bleed on their own. But cuts accumulate. And Ava, slowly, quietly, began shrinking. She straightened her hair more often because Ethan said it made her look sleek. She toned down her laugh because he said her humor was too sharp. She stopped wearing bright colors because he casually remarked that neutrals were more professional. She let go of hobbies she loved because Ethan called them distractions. It wasn't that he forced her, it was that he nudged her. And love made her believe the nudges were guidance, not control. When their second anniversary arrived, Ethan gifted her a designer watch. Beautiful, heavy, cold. I wanted to get you something elegant, he said. Something that reflects the woman you're becoming. But Ava didn't feel elegant. She felt edited. His career kept soaring. Senior strategist, director-level candidate, panels, galas, conferences in cities she'd never visited. He'd return with stories of sleek offices and brilliant colleagues, always mentioning Sloane, her ideas, her sharp wit, how fun she was. Ava tried to join his world. She went to dinners, laughed at jokes she didn't find funny, wore the dresses Ethan preferred, sleek, simple, muted. She straightened her curls into a glossy curtain, even though every pass of the flat iron felt like she was smoothing away a piece of herself. But each time she stepped into his circles, she felt smaller, more invisible, more like an accessory than a partner. She wondered if this was normal, if all marriages had invisible ledgers, his success, her support, his dreams, her sacrifices. But she told herself it was just a season, just a phase, just temporary. Until one evening, while Ava was preparing dinner alone in their quiet kitchen, Ethan walked in, dropped his briefcase, and said in an offhand tone, "You know, people at work always ask why you never went to grad school for something bigger." Bigger, he repeated, as if the word didn't slice through her. "I tell them you're happy where you are," he continued, loosening his tie. "But maybe you should consider something more. I mean, you don't want people thinking you've stagnated." There it was. The word that would echo later in a restaurant under dim lights. Stagnant. Ava felt something inside her still. A pond with no movement. A heartbeat that forgot its rhythm for just one moment. She smiled weakly and said nothing, because she wasn't ready to see what was happening. Not yet. Not then. This is how erosion wins. Not through force, but through familiarity. Through the slow acceptance of less. Through the belief that losing yourself is part of loving someone else. Ava had once danced barefoot in her living room. Now she tiptoed in her own marriage, afraid to make the wrong sound. The tragedy wasn't that Ethan stopped loving her. The tragedy was that Ava stopped seeing herself, and Ethan did nothing to remind her who she used to be. It happened so gradually that Ava almost convinced herself she was imagining it. Affairs, she believed, arrived with lipstick stains or late-night excuses, not with polite smiles in conference rooms or inside jokes whispered at corporate mixers. But in Ethan's world, the glossy, hyper-ambitious tech universe, where everything was about perception, infidelity didn't hide in the dark. It strutted under fluorescent lighting and called itself collaboration. Sloane Hartman appeared first as a name, then a voice, then a presence that filled every space Ava was supposed to occupy. Sloane cracked the pitch. Sloane saved the deal. You should hear the way Sloane thinks. She's brilliant. He spoke her name the way some men speak of luxury cars, admiration tinged with something hungry. Ava tried to be supportive, tried to smile when he lit up describing a colleague she had never met. But a quiet instinct prickled the back of her neck. It wasn't jealousy, it was recognition, the same way animals sense a shift in the air before a storm breaks. When Ava first met Sloane at the firm's spring mixer, she understood the danger immediately. Sloane was the kind of woman tech culture celebrated. Sharp, blonde, MBA from Stanford, a strategic mind that sliced through problems like a scalpel. She wore tailored suits and a ruthlessly clean bob, the kind of hairstyle that whispered, "I don't have time for indecision." Sloane shook Ava's hand with perfect pressure. "Ethan talks about you," she said, the same line as the restaurant. But this time, Ava was still naive enough to hope it meant admiration. But Sloane's eyes told another story, curiosity mixed with quiet dismissal. A surgical glance that assessed Ava's dress, her coils, her warm tone, the softness in her posture, like she was calculating whether this woman beside Ethan could possibly be his equal. Around them, the office buzzed with the kind of energy Ava hated. Performative, competitive, suffocating beneath its own self-importance. Big screens displayed metrics no one explained. People talked about scaling empathy without knowing what empathy actually felt like. It was a room packed with egos wearing Patagonia vests and expensive sneakers. And Ava, black, brilliant in a different way, rooted in community work, dressed in a jewel-toned blouse because she refused to blend into grayscale, stood out like a truth no one wanted to hear. Ethan didn't notice, or maybe he did, and liked it. Because as the months passed, Sloane's name crossed the border from professional to intimate. He started comparing them. "You should see how confident Sloane is at presentations. She doesn't let things get to her. She just pushes through. She's so driven. It's refreshing." Ava didn't mirror Sloane. Ava wasn't supposed to. Her work required softness, listening, healing, holding space for broken teenagers. But in Ethan's increasingly ruthless world, softness wasn't a strength. It was an inconvenience. Something else happened too. Something quieter, almost invisible, unless you were paying attention. At company events, people gradually stopped asking Ava about her work. When she introduced herself as a school therapist, she saw the flicker, the polite, restrained, dismissive flicker that said, "Oh, not corporate, not one of us." Sometimes they'd mistake her for event staff. Once, a senior VP handed her his empty glass without looking up. He apologized when she didn't take it, embarrassed, but not enough to remember her face afterward. Ethan laughed it off. He didn't mean it. That was when Ava first felt the truth like a splinter beneath her skin. In Ethan's world, she was becoming invisible. Sloane was becoming indispensable. But the real shift happened the night Ava stopped by the office unannounced. Ethan had left his laptop at home, and she happened to be 10 minutes away after a late meeting with a student's family. She brought it to him, expecting a quick thank you and maybe a relieved kiss. When she stepped into the open-plan workspace, she saw them through a glass meeting room. Ethan and Sloane, heads bent close over a document, bodies angled toward each other in the way people lean when they forget anyone else exists. They weren't touching. They didn't have to. Intimacy isn't always physical. Sometimes it's in the silence between two people who share a secret rhythm. Sloane laughed at something he said, a soft, knowing laugh. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. An instinct, a reflex, the kind of gesture you only make when you've crossed a line long before your hands do. Ava froze. She didn't speak. She didn't walk in. She didn't accuse. She simply watched the man she loved move in a world where she no longer existed. He noticed her eventually, eyes widening as if caught doing something innocent but embarrassing. He waved her in, too brightly, too casually, his voice pitched like he was trying to convince the room, and himself, that nothing was wrong. "Hey, look who's here." He kissed her cheek. It felt like a performance. Sloane smiled, but her eyes flickered with something unmistakable. Triumph. Ava felt heat rise in her chest. Humiliation. Fury. Something deeper, something older, like the inherited memory of 1,000 black women before her who had been made to feel less than beside the smiling confidence of white womanhood. She handed Ethan the laptop. He barely thanked her. And for the first time, Ava wondered if the erosion in her marriage wasn't accidental at all. What if it was intentional? What if Ethan wasn't drifting away, What if he was walking towards something else, or someone else? The night Ava found proof, the sky over Chicago was the color of old bruises, deep purple fading into black, clouds heavy but refusing to break. She came home late, shoulders tight from a day of holding other people's pain. A student had finally admitted she was self-harming. Another had walked out of a session without a word. Ava had spent hours absorbing their storms, steady as always, her voice a soft anchor in the chaos. By the time she pushed open the townhouse door, she was exhausted in that bone-deep way that had nothing to do with sleep. The house smelled faintly of Ethan's cologne and takeout. An empty container sat on the counter, chopsticks tossed carelessly beside it. His gym bag lay open by the stairs, sneakers half out, shirt draped over the banister. He wasn't home. Ava checked the time. 9:47 p.m. He'd said he'd be back by 8. A year ago, she would have texted him, "Everything okay? Running late?" Now she stared at her phone and heard his earlier words echoing. "You don't have to monitor everything I do, Ava. I'm not one of your students." So she didn't text. She just moved through the house like a ghost, tidying small messes so she wouldn't feel like one. She washed the takeout container, folded the shirt, lined up the shoes. Each act a ritual, a way of saying, "I'm still here. I still care. I still choose us." The phone was what betrayed him. He must have dropped it on the kitchen island in his rush. It lay there, screen down, charging cable dangling. Ava walked past it at first, planning to shower, to crawl into bed with a book she wouldn't actually read. But on her second trip through the kitchen, it lit up. One message, then another, then another. Her body knew before her mind did. Something low in her gut twisted, the same instinct she'd ignored for months. The same quiet alarm that had been ringing ever since Ethan started living half his life behind a locked screen. Ava wasn't a woman who snooped. She'd sat across from too many teens whose parents violated every boundary in the name of protection. She believed in trust, believed in privacy, believed in staying on the right side of the line. But there is a moment, if you've been lied to long enough, when trust stops being a virtue and becomes a weapon turned against you. The screen lit again, and this time she saw enough. Still thinking about last night, her heartbeat stumbled. The phone vibrated again. "You make it very hard to focus at work, you know that? Your wife doesn't appreciate what she has. I would never make you feel like that." The world narrowed. The hum of the fridge grew loud. The clock on the wall ticked like it was counting down to something. Ava reached for the phone with fingers that didn't feel like hers. For a second, she just held it. She could still put it down. She could still pretend she hadn't seen. But pretending had gotten her here. Her thumb moved of its own accord. The screen unlocked to Ethan's face, one of those filtered photos he used on his work profile, smiling like life had never cut him. Below Sloane's name, their thread stretched back weeks, months. She scrolled. Every line was a blow. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was, God, Sloane, I haven't felt that way in years. With you, I can breathe. Don't worry about Ava. She's comfortable. She doesn't want more. Not like we do." Ava's vision blurred. It was as if someone had taken the story of her marriage and quietly rewritten it in the background, line by line, until she was no longer the main character. Just a footnote. A plot device. The woman he thanked in speeches but forgot in practice. She read messages about hotel rooms and stolen lunches, about inside jokes shared in meetings while she sat at home waiting for his running late texts. She saw photos, nothing graphic, just enough. Sloane's bare shoulder against white sheets, Ethan's hand on her waist at some rooftop bar Ava had never been to. Ava's training as a therapist betrayed her then. Her brain split in two. One part of her watched like a clinician, noting patterns, identifying emotional grooming, cataloging the gaslighting. Ethan reframing their marriage as a cage, painting himself as the misunderstood hero, casting Sloane as the only one who got him. The other part of her was just a woman whose life was collapsing in her own kitchen. Her knees nearly gave out. She gripped the edge of the counter until her fingers hurt. A sound clawed its way up her throat but never made it out. Half sob, half laugh, strangled before it reached air. He was humming when he walked in. Of all the details that would later haunt her, that might be the worst. He came home humming. Keys jingling, footsteps light, like a man whose life was perfectly intact. "Hey," he called out, kicking off his shoes. "You still up?" She couldn't answer. Not yet. For one wild second, she imagined confronting him with the phone in her hand, slamming it down on the counter, demanding answers. You picture yourself that way, don't you? Strong, uncompromising, ready for war. But when the moment comes, devastation doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides. She placed the phone back exactly where she'd found it, screen down, cord hooked neatly over the edge. She turned away, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear his footsteps enter the kitchen. He kissed her temple in passing, the same casual gesture he'd used for months. "You ate?" he asked, opening the fridge. "I grabbed Ty on the way home. Long day. We had to rewrite half the deck before tomorrow." His lies were smooth from practice. Ava stared at him. There was a slight crease between his brows, the only sign he was tired. He looked normal, the same, unshattered. How do you look at the person you love and see a stranger holding a knife? "I'm going to bed," she murmured. Her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "Yeah, get some sleep. You've been working too much," Ethan replied, already half distracted by an email on his smartwatch. Too much, too intense, too everything. She climbed the stairs on legs that felt numb. In their bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall until the city lights blurred behind the curtains. Her mind raced with questions, but the loudest wasn't the one she expected. Not "how could he?" Not "why her?" It was this: "What do I do now?" Because discovery is only the first fracture. The real breaking comes after, in the days and weeks when you have to live with the knowledge. In the mornings when you wake up knowing the person beside you has chosen someone else and is still choosing you to lie to. Ava lay down on her side of the bed, facing the wall. When Ethan climbed in later, the mattress dipped. He draped an arm across her waist, fingers resting where they always had, as if his touch didn't burn now. She didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't say, "I saw everything." She understood something brutally simple. Once the truth is spoken aloud, it demands action. And Ava, the woman who coached teenagers through impossible choices, suddenly realized she didn't yet know how to choose herself. The invitation came 2 weeks after Ava read the messages. By then, the knowledge of Ethan and Sloane had settled into her bones like cold. It was always there, humming beneath her skin. She woke up with it, went to work with it, sat in sessions with teenagers talking about betrayal and thought, "Me too," but never said a word. She hadn't confronted him, not yet. Every night she rehearsed it in her head, how she'd say his name, how she'd slide the phone across the table, how she'd ask, "When did you decide I was optional?" But each time the words dissolved on her tongue, strangled by a fear she wasn't ready to name. Then one evening, as she was chopping onions for a stir-fry he'd probably be too late to eat, Ethan walked into the kitchen with a brightness that felt rehearsed. "Hey," he said, leaning against the counter like this was any ordinary Tuesday. "There's a dinner Thursday night, a few people from work. You should come." You should come. Not "do you want to?" Not "can you?" A statement, not an invitation. Ava's hand paused midair. "Dinner?" "Yeah." He opened the fridge, pretending to search for something he didn't need. "Just a casual thing. Some colleagues. I think it'd be good for them to, see us together." The words were harmless on the surface. They scraped her anyway. "See us," she repeated. He didn't flinch. "It matters how people at my level are perceived. Investors, partners, they like stability, a solid home life, a wife who—" He hesitated, then smiled like he'd landed on something charming rather than cruel. "Who makes me look good." There it was. Not spoken plainly, but clear enough. She wasn't being invited into his world. She was being positioned. A prop, a proof of concept, the before picture in a story he was workshopping. "Who'll be there?" Ava asked, even though she already knew the answer. She could feel Sloane's name waiting in his mouth like a dare. "Just a few people," he shrugged. "Some partners, some of the strategy team. Sloane will be there, obviously. She's leading the new expansion, so..." Of course she was. Of course, he needed his affair partner and his wife in the same room. The ground beneath Ava's feet didn't crack this time. It shifted, just enough for her to understand. This dinner wasn't about inclusion. It was about narrative control. He wanted them to see him as a good man, a family man, a man with a loyal wife he'd outgrown. You can't villainize someone publicly until you've staged enough scenes to make your exit believable. "Okay," Ava heard herself say. "I'll come." She didn't say, "To what? A meeting? A performance? My own execution?" He kissed her cheek in thanks, like she'd agreed to iron a shirt. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while Ethan slept beside her, breathing slow and even. Her mind cycled through every message she'd read. "Your wife doesn't appreciate what she has. With you, I can breathe. You deserve more." The old Ava, the one with sharp boundaries and a grandmother's voice in her ear, would have walked away. But this Ava had been softened, worn down by years of being told that good wives stayed, worked harder, made it work. So she decided to try one last time. If there's a version of you listening, the version that stayed longer than you should have because you needed to know you tried everything, you know exactly what that decision feels like. It's not weakness, it's hope, weaponized against you. On Thursday, she stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Her students had drained her that day, a girl whose boyfriend shared her photos without consent, a boy who'd been jumped walking home. Ava had poured herself out until she was hollow, then come home to apply foundation over the evidence of her own exhaustion. She chose a dress that hugged her curves without apologizing for them. Deep blue, off-shoulder, elegant but unmistakably her. Her coils were shaped into a high-textured bun, gold cuffs glinting against brown skin. She looked like a woman who belonged in any room she walked into. For a moment, she caught her own gaze in the mirror and saw a flash of the girl she used to be. The one who rode her bike along the lake at sunrise and believed her future would be built on mutual respect, not strategy. "Ready?" Ethan called from downstairs. As she walked down, his eyes swept over her. A beat too long, a beat too empty. "You look nice," he said. Nice. That was all. On the drive to the restaurant, he talked about work, about a pitch, about an executive from San Francisco flying in. Sloane's name threaded through his sentences like a refrain. "Sloane's really been killing it," he said at one point, one hand on the wheel, the other adjusting the Bluetooth. "She just gets it, you know, the pace, the hunger. She's not afraid to take up space." Ava's fingers tightened around her clutch. "What about me?" she asked quietly. He glanced at her, brow furrowing. "What about you? Do I take up too much space?" He laughed, a short, baffled sound. "Ava, this isn't about you. Why do you always make everything about your feelings? I'm talking about work." There it was again, that subtle dismissal. The way he framed her as emotional whenever she asked for clarity. She swallowed the hurt like a pill and watched the city lights smear past the car window. Somewhere between their house and that restaurant, she realized, she wasn't going because she believed in them. She was going because she needed to see, finally, what he'd turned her into. The restaurant was the kind of place that pretended not to care what people thought while caring deeply. Exposed brick, soft jazz, waiters in black aprons moving like choreography. Ava felt eyes on her as they entered. The tall black woman with the white husband whose face looked familiar in that "I've seen him on LinkedIn" kind of way. The kind of couple people projected stories onto. He led her toward the corner booth, toward the laughter she recognized too well by now. Sloane was already there. She was dressed like she'd read the room's lighting before choosing her outfit. Ivory silk blouse, trousers that whispered money, hair in loose, expensive waves. She occupied the space like she'd been assured it was hers. When Ethan introduced them, again, as if their lives hadn't already collided in 100 unseen ways, Ava noticed the flicker in Sloane's eyes. Not guilt, not shame, possession. Throughout the evening, Ethan performed a version of their marriage that fit his desired script. He talked about Ava's work like it was a charming hobby, not a calling. She works at a public school on the South Side, he said, as if it were a temporary inconvenience she'd eventually outgrow. She's happy there. It doesn't demand too much. He talked about Sloane's work like it was destiny. She's the reason we landed our last deal, he bragged. Can't imagine doing this without her. When the conversation turned to growth and drive, he used phrases Ava had heard in the texts. Some people are just content, and that's fine. But some of us, we're just wired to keep pushing, to never stagnate. Stagnate. The words slid into the center of the table like a knife. Everyone pretended not to see it. In that moment, Ava understood. She hadn't been invited to dinner. She'd been summoned as Exhibit A. The comfortable wife, the stable backdrop. The reason he would later tell the story as, I had to leave. I had outgrown her. It wasn't just betrayal of the body or of the heart. It was betrayal of narrative. He was rewriting her into the villain of his ambition. And sitting there, under warm lights and the clink of cutlery, Ava made a quiet decision. If he was storyboarding her downfall, she would write her own plot twist. But first, she would let this scene play out. She would remember every word, every glance, every subtle humiliation. Because one day, the same way he'd weaponized her loyalty, she would weaponize the truth. Not out of spite, but out of survival. The dinner ended with polite laughter and firm handshakes. Sloane's perfume hung in the air long after she left the table. Ethan placed a hand on Ava's back as they walked out, but it felt like a stage direction, not affection. In the car, he asked, See, that wasn't so bad, was it? Ava looked out at the city, at the streets where she had once been fully herself. No, she said calmly, not bad at all. He didn't know that what she meant was, not for you. The gala was supposed to be elegant, aspirational, the kind of event where careers are elevated by nothing more than a handshake under chandelier light. For Ethan, it was another opportunity to be seen. For Ava, it was supposed to be a neutral space, a chance to breathe in public without feeling like she was performing for forgiveness. But the moment they stepped into the Field Museum's grand rotunda, Ava felt the shift. The air was thick with money and intention. Couples glided across polished marble floors. Clusters of executives gathered beneath towering dinosaur skeletons. And everywhere she turned, glances slid over her like fingerprints she hadn't consented to. Chicago's elite tech world was here. The men in black suits, the women in curated couture, the low hum of power disguised as polite laughter. Ava walked in beside Ethan, regal in an emerald gown that hugged her body like it had been stitched for her alone. Her natural hair soared upward in a sculpted crown, coils gleaming beneath golden light. She looked like royalty. But royalty means little in a room built by people who pretend they don't see you. Smile, Ethan murmured without looking at her. This is a big night. For whom, he didn't say. Ava lifted her chin. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her ear, as it often did in spaces like this. Don't dim, baby. Not for anybody. But dimming wasn't the problem tonight. Being unseen was. Ethan immediately drifted toward his colleagues, and Ava followed half a step behind. Close enough to appear as part of his life, far enough to show she wasn't clinging. Several executives nodded at Ethan with genuine recognition, then gave Ava a polite, hollow smile, the kind reserved for spouses they assumed had nothing to add to the conversation. Oh, I didn't realize you brought someone, one man said to Ethan, even though Ava stood directly in front of him. Someone. Not Ava. Not a name. Not a person with a story. Someone. She swallowed the sting and extended her hand anyway. Ava Robinson. He shook it lightly, already looking past her. Microaggressions are rarely loud. They're subtle. They're cumulative. They demand that you carry the weight of proving they happened. Ava had carried that weight her whole life. She tried to engage. She mentioned her work, trauma therapy for teens on the South Side. One of the women at the circle widened her eyes in surprise, voice pitched too high. "Oh, wow, good for you. That must be so heavy. I could never." The emphasis lingered long enough to imply, "Because what you do isn't what someone like me would want." Ava smiled graciously. "It's meaningful." Another woman chimed in. "My niece teaches elementary school. It's really such a nice little job. You must have so much free time." Before Ava could respond, Ethan cut in, laughing too quickly. "Ava likes her comfort zone. She's not really into the whole career ladder thing." A punch disguised as affection. Ava blinked. Something inside her ribcage slipped. Comfort zone. The same phrase he'd used with Sloane. The group tittered politely. Sloane stepped into the circle then, wearing a floor-length gown that shimmered like liquid silver. Men looked at her the way men look at expensive art, openly, unapologetically. Women looked at her with calculation. Her face brightened when she saw Ethan. Too bright, too familiar. She leaned in and kissed his cheek, something Ava had never seen her do. Ethan's smile stretched wider, shoulders straightening as if her presence inflated him. "Wow," Sloane said to Ava, eyes flicking from her hair to her hips. "You look different." Different. Not beautiful, not stunning, different. And somehow the word felt like a door closing. "Thanks," Ava replied coolly. "I feel like myself." "Good," Sloane said, tilting her head. "It's nice when people don't give up on trying new things." No one else reacted, but Ava felt the cut. There are insults so subtle, only the intended target bleeds. Then came the moment Ava would replay for months. The moment that didn't just bruise, but broke something vital. An executive announced the start of the donor awards. Music swelled. Couples moved toward the dance floor, forming a shifting constellation of bodies under the domed ceiling. Ethan turned to Sloane, not to Ava, to Sloane. "Shall we?" he asked, extending a hand. Ava thought she'd misheard, thought he was joking, thought surely he wasn't about to do this here. But Sloane took his hand, and Ethan placed his palm on the small of her back with a familiarity that hollowed Ava out. "Ethan," Ava breathed, her voice a thin thread. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her, didn't pause. They walked onto the dance floor as though it belonged to them. People noticed. Of course they noticed. A black woman in emerald, standing alone while her white husband danced with his beautiful white colleague. This was the kind of social rupture a room like this savored quietly. Some looked away out of embarrassment. Others stared. A few whispered. Ava's throat tightened. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, in the soles of her feet. For a moment she thought she might pass out. She wasn't jealous. She wasn't surprised. She was humiliated. This was a public rewriting of her marriage. A silent declaration that she had been replaced. A staged performance designed to make the transition seamless when he finally left. As Ethan and Sloane swayed, smiling up at each other under the golden light, Ava felt herself slipping into that old, dangerous survival mode. The kind where a woman becomes invisible, even to herself. Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. Not here, not for them. Instead, she stepped backward, heels clicking on the marble floor, until she found the nearest exit. The cool night air slapped her cheeks as she burst through the museum doors, but she welcomed it. It was the first honest thing she'd felt all evening. She stood under the stone columns, breathing hard, shaking, her hands gripping the railing as if the city might tilt her into the street. Inside, the music continued. The gala glowed. Her husband danced with the woman he'd chosen. Chicago, vast and indifferent, stretched before her. And Ava realized this wasn't the end of her marriage. This was the moment she became a ghost in it. Ava didn't remember the drive home from the gala. She remembered the cold, the city lights blurring like tears she refused to shed, and the way her hands trembled on the steering wheel, even though she willed them still. She remembered walking through the front door with dignity clinging to her like a thin coat in winter. What she remembered most was the silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses against your ribs, demanding to be broken. "Ethan, where did you disappear to?" he asked lightly, kicking off his shoes. People were asking. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Why did you leave?" Not, "Did something happen?" Just his reputation, just the optics. Ava had spent the entire ride home rehearsing her words. But now, standing in the warm glow of the kitchen lights, while her husband poured himself a drink, she felt her voice shrink to a whisper. "You danced with her," she said. He didn't look up. "Who?" "You know who." A sigh, exasperated, as if she were a child interrupting him. "Ava, please don't start." Something inside her snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. It was a soft, clean break, like a bone finally giving beneath pressure it should never have borne. "Ethan," she said, voice low and steady, "you humiliated me." That made him turn. He leaned against the counter, swirling his drink, his expression shifting into something practiced. Gentle concern mixed with irritation. The gaslighter's uniform. "Humiliated," he repeated. "Ava, it was a dance at a gala. That's what people do. You're blowing this out of proportion." She laughed, one sharp exhale. "You kissed her cheek." He waved the comment away. "It was a greeting. You held her like..." Her voice broke. She forced it steady. "Like you used to hold me." His jaw tightened. "So this is about jealousy?" "No," she said quietly. "This is about disrespect." He scoffed. "God, Ava, you read into everything. You're so emotional lately." There it was, the dagger he always reached for. "You're emotional. You're sensitive. You're imagining things." She stepped closer. "Ethan, stop. I know about the affair." The room stilled. The refrigerator hummed. A distant car horn echoed from the street. Ethan's eyes flicked, just barely, before smoothing back into denial. "Ava," he said, slow and careful, "you're being paranoid." "I read the messages." Silence. Then the facade cracked, revealing a flash of anger beneath. "You went through my phone?" "Don't twist this," she said, the heat rising in her voice. "Don't you dare make that the problem." His expression hardened. "It is the problem. Snooping? Seriously? That's what you're admitting right now?" "You cheated on me," she said, "and you violated my privacy." Gaslighting is a strange kind of violence. It doesn't hit you. It erases you. Ava felt a familiar tug in her chest, the instinct to explain, to defend, to fix. But tonight she was too tired to bleed for a man who pretended he wasn't holding the knife. "How long?" she asked. Ethan shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "It's not serious." "How long?" she repeated. He rolled his eyes. "A few months." "8," Ava said. "It's been 8 months." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, annoyance, calculation. "Okay, fine, but it wasn't like that. We connected because you and I were just different now." There it was, the narrative, the story he'd been crafting behind her back. "You've changed," he continued. "You're always tired, always wrapped up in your students' problems. There's no passion anymore, no spark. You don't challenge yourself. You're comfortable with mediocrity." Mediocrity. The word knocked the air from her lungs. "You think helping traumatized kids is mediocrity?" she whispered. "I think you settled," he said bluntly. "And I didn't. Sloane gets that. She's driven. She pushes me to be better. She's hungry." Ava froze. "And I'm not?" she asked. He hesitated for too long, and that was its own answer. "You're stagnant, Ava," he said finally. "I've outgrown this. I've outgrown us." A crack split through her chest. Not the sharp pain of betrayal, but the deep, dull shock of recognition. He meant it. He believed it. A man can destroy you more thoroughly with quiet conviction than with rage. She stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Not the charming stranger she'd met at a hackathon. Not the man who'd cried at their wedding. Not the husband she'd built a life with. This man was small. Smaller than the dream she'd given up for him. Smaller than the apology he would never offer. smaller than the love she had poured into the cracks of their marriage until she had nothing left for herself. "I want a divorce," she said. The words came out calm, icy, final. Ethan laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "A divorce? Ava, don't be ridiculous. You're upset. We can go to counseling or something. You don't just throw away a marriage because you're having a moment." She stepped back him as if physical distance was the only way to keep her sanity intact. "I'm not throwing anything away," she said. "You did that, piece by piece, message by message, choice by choice." He scoffed. "You're overreacting." "I'm done reacting," she replied. "I'm acting." He set his drink down hard enough that it sloshed onto the counter. "You're making a mistake." "No," she said. "I made a mistake years ago when I believed you wouldn't break me." He stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he'd forgotten the woman she used to be because he'd spent so long sculpting her into something smaller. "What about the house?" he demanded. "You can leave," she said simply. He blinked. "You can't kick me out. This is my house too." "Then I'll leave." He froze, unprepared for her clarity. For the first time all evening, fear crossed his face. Not fear of losing her, but fear of losing control of the story. "Ava," he said, voice dropping, "don't do this." But she was already turning away. Not dramatically, not tearfully, just done. At the top of the stairs, she paused and looked down at him. "You didn't outgrow me, Ethan," she said softly. "You abandoned yourself. I just finally stopped taking the blame for it." She closed the bedroom door and locked it with hands that no longer trembled. In the silence that followed, she felt something unfamiliar. Not peace, not relief, something deeper. The beginning of her return to herself. Ava didn't leave the bedroom for 3 days. Not because she couldn't move. Her body still functioned, still breathed, still existed, but because everything inside her felt suspended. Time became thick and slow, like syrup spilling down glass. She slept in thin, restless stretches. She woke with her heart racing. She ate only when the dizziness threatened to push her to the floor. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet refusal to open the curtains. On the morning of the 4th day, sunlight finally forced its way through the blinds, thin and insistent. It washed over the photos on the dresser, wedding pictures, anniversary smiles, weekend trips where she and Ethan looked like a couple from a magazine spread. But Ava felt nothing as she stared at them, only a vast, echoing numbness. It wasn't until her phone buzzed for the 7th time that she finally picked it up. Naomi. Her sister's name lit the screen, glowing like a lifeline Ava had been too ashamed to reach for. Ava didn't answer. She couldn't. But Naomi was Naomi, born 2 minutes earlier, bossy since birth, and utterly unwilling to let silence win. 20 minutes later, the front door opened with the certainty of someone who knew exactly where the spare key was hidden. Footsteps rushed up the stairs, then a soft knock. "Ava," Naomi's voice called through the door. "Open up. Don't make me pick this lock. I will. You know I will." Ava's strength cracked. Not all the way, but enough. She crossed the room, unlocked the door, and stepped back as Naomi pushed inside, eyes widening as she took in the rumpled sheets, the untouched food containers, the lifeless stillness hanging in the air. "Oh, sis," Naomi whispered, already gathering Ava into her arms. "Why didn't you call me?" Ava didn't answer. Her throat tightened, and for the first time since the gala, since the dinner, since the messages, she felt the full weight of everything she'd been carrying. It hit her all at once: shame, rage, sorrow, disbelief, and she collapsed into Naomi's chest like a child seeking shelter. Naomi didn't ask questions. She held Ava the way their grandmother used to, steady, warm, immovable. When the sobs finally tore free, they weren't delicate. They were guttural, violent. Years of shrinking herself so Ethan could grow. Months of ignoring the quiet alarms in her spirit. Days of existing in limbo between denial and truth. Naomi stroked her hair, rocking her slightly. "Let it out. I've got you. Ava cried until her eyes burned, until her throat ached, until the tears slowed into trembling breaths. When she finally pulled back, Naomi cupped her face. "Tell me," she said softly, "all of it." And Ava did. She told her about the messages, the dinner, the gala, the dancing, the dismissal, the divorce, the way Ethan had said stagnant like it was her name, the way she'd started to believe him. Naomi listened with a fury that simmered beneath her calm exterior. When Ava finished, Naomi stood abruptly and marched to the dresser. She grabbed the wedding photo, the one where Ethan held Ava's hand, as if she were the center of his universe, and she turned it face down with a decisive thud. Good, Ava thought distantly. She hadn't had the strength to do it herself. 8 months, Naomi repeated, voice sharp. 8 months, and he let you sit beside him like everything was fine? Mama was right. Pretty boys with charm are a hazard. Ava let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Naomi turned back, her expression softening. Sis, listen to me. You didn't fail. You didn't imagine this. You loved a man who didn't know how to love you back. You gave him a home he wasn't built to keep. Ava wiped her cheeks. I feel so stupid. No, Naomi said firmly. You feel broken. That's different. And temporary. Ava looked away, voice cracking. I don't know who I am without him. Naomi sat beside her again. Then we're going to remember together. She reached for Ava's hand, squeezing it tightly. You come from women who survive. Grandma Loretta didn't raise us to crumble over no weak-hearted man. A breath hitched in Ava's chest when Naomi said their grandmother's name. A memory rose, a warm kitchen, a hymn playing, fingers braiding her hair with love and strength. Baby, her grandmother had once whispered, life will test your spirit, but you've got blood in you that remembers how to rise. Ava felt that memory wrap around her like a quilt. Naomi stood. Come downstairs, at least sit on the couch. If you stay in this room any longer, it's going to swallow you. Ava hesitated, but Naomi reached out, extending her hand the way she had when they were children, crossing busy streets. Come on, she said gently. Step 1 is breathing somewhere else. Ava took her hand. Downstairs, Naomi made tea, fussing loudly in the kitchen, the way she did whenever she needed to keep from yelling about the injustice of it all. Ava sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the bookshelf that still held Ethan's novels, his trophies, pieces of him scattered through the home like uninvited ghosts. What am I supposed to do? Ava asked softly. Naomi came over, set the tea in her hands and said, you survive. That's it. 1 hour at a time, one breath at a time. And when you're strong enough, you rebuild. But not for him, for you. Ava blinked slowly. I don't feel strong. That's okay, Naomi said. Strong isn't a feeling, it's a decision. Later that afternoon, when Naomi had stepped outside to take a call, Ava wandered to the hallway closet, the one where she kept old boxes full of memories she hadn't touched in years. Something told her to open it. She pulled down a worn cardboard box and carried it to the living room. Inside were pieces of her past, college notebooks, photos from Howard, journals from her teen years, letters her grandmother had written in looping handwriting. Near the bottom, she found the journal from her senior year. She opened it gently. On the first page was a message she had written to herself at 17. I want to be a woman who helps people heal without losing herself in the process. A sob rose in her throat. She turned the page. I want to be strong without becoming hard, kind without becoming small, loved without disappearing. Ava closed her eyes. She felt her grandmother's strength settle into her bones, felt the hum of every woman who came before her, women who had endured betrayal, heartbreak, abandonment, injustice, and still rose, still lived, still claimed joy. When she opened her eyes again, something inside her had shifted. Naomi re-entered the room and froze when she saw Ava sitting upright, journal in her lap, eyes clear despite the pain. You okay? She asked cautiously. Ava nodded once, slow but certain. No, she said truthfully, but I will be. It wasn't resilience, not yet. It was the first breath after drowning, but that was enough to begin. The first time Ava sat on the other side of the couch, she almost turned around and walked out. The office was warm and softly lit, the kind of space designed to look nothing like a clinic. Shelves lined with books and plants, a diffuser humming quietly, a box of tissues set on the coffee table with the quiet confidence of something that knew it would be needed. She'd recommended therapy to hundreds of teenagers. She'd written referrals, advocated with parents, fought insurance companies. She'd said the words, "Getting help is strength, not weakness." So many times they came automatically now. But sitting there, hands clasped too tightly in her lap, stomach knotted, she felt exposed in a way she hadn't expected. The door opened and Dr. Elena Rivera stepped in. Late 50s, silver streaks woven through dark hair pulled into a low bun. Eyes that had seen enough to know when to rush and when to wait. "Ava?" she asked gently. Ava stood. Yes, that's me." "It's good to meet you," Dr. Rivera said. "Come, sit. Take your time." They exchanged small talk at first. Background, work, basic questions. Then Dr. Rivera tilted her head slightly, studying Ava with a gaze that was neither invasive nor casual. It landed somewhere in between, precise. "You're a therapist yourself," she said. "That can make this both harder and easier." "How so?" Ava asked. "Well," Dr. Rivera smiled, "you already know the language. You understand the process. You're self-aware. That helps. But it also means you'll be tempted to stay up here." She tapped her temple. "Analyzing everything so you don't have to feel it down here." She placed a hand over her heart. Ava exhaled. "I don't really know how to do this from this side." "Then that's where we'll start," Dr. Rivera said. "Tell me why you're here." There were 1,000 answers. "Because my husband cheated. Because my marriage exploded. Because I can't recognize my own reflection." What came out instead was the quiet truth. "I don't know who I am without him." Dr. Rivera nodded, as if she'd been expecting that. "And who were you before him?" Silence. It stretched between them, not cruelly, but insistently. Ava opened her mouth, and nothing came. Memories flickered. Howard's campus, her bike by the lake, kids in her office. But they felt like snapshots of someone else. Finally, she whispered, "I don't remember." "Good," Dr. Rivera said softly. "Then our work is clear. We're going to find her." The sessions became a lifeline. Dr. Rivera did not coddle her. She did not rush her either. She asked questions that cut neatly through Ava's rehearsed explanations. "When did you first start making yourself smaller to be loved? How did it feel in your body the first time your instincts said something was wrong and you ignored them? Who taught you that abandoning yourself was noble?" Sometimes Ava left feeling raw, like every nerve ending had been scrubbed. Other times she left feeling oddly lighter, like she'd put down a suitcase she'd been carrying so long she forgot it was heavy. Dr. Rivera assigned homework. "Write a letter," she said one day, "from the version of you at 17 to the version of you who stayed with Ethan after you knew." What would she say? Ava stared at the blank page for an hour that night before the words finally spilled out. She wrote about how her teenage self had promised never to disappear inside someone else's story. How she'd sworn she'd walk away from anyone who made her feel less rather than more. How she had broken her own vow in the name of being understanding. She wrote, "You knew better. You did it anyway. But knowing better now means you don't get to keep choosing worse." When she read the letter aloud in session, Ava cried the way people cry when they're grieving not just a person, but a version of themselves. Dr. Rivera listened, then said quietly, "You're not just mourning Ethan. You're mourning the years you betrayed yourself for the sake of not being alone." The words landed with the heavy clarity of truth. Outside therapy, life did not pause to accommodate her healing. She still had students melting down in her office, still had parents sending panicked emails, still had lesson plans and staff meetings and fire drills. Some days she barely held herself together. Other days she surprised herself by laughing, really laughing, at some ridiculous thing a ninth grader said. One afternoon, a 16-year-old girl slumped in her chair and said, "I feel stupid for going back to someone who keeps hurting me." Ava's throat tightened. "You're not stupid," she said. "You're hopeful. And hope, when pointed at the wrong person too long, can wound you." The girl blinked slowly. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "I don't know if it stops," Ava answered honestly. "But it changes. It becomes manageable. It becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you." Somewhere between her words and the girl's nod, Ava realized she wasn't just speaking to her. She was speaking to herself. It was Naomi who dragged her to the healing circle. "Second Tuesday of the month," Naomi said, waving a flyer in Ava's face. "Black Women's Healing Group. Social workers, nurses, teachers, therapists. Sound familiar?" Ava groaned. "I talk for a living. I don't want to talk in my free time." "It's not about talking," Naomi replied. "It's about not being the only one holding everything." So, reluctantly, Ava went. The community center's basement was painted in warm colors, folding chairs arranged in a circle. There were women of all ages, some in scrubs, some in office wear, some in leggings and oversized sweatshirts. A table in the corner held tea and store-bought cookies. A handwritten sign on the wall read, "This is where we lay it down." The facilitator, a woman in her 60s with locks streaked silver and a laugh like thunder, introduced herself as Miss Denise. "We're not here to compare wounds," she said. "We're here to remember we're not crazy, and we're not alone." They went around the circle. A nurse whose husband minimized her stress. A social worker whose family insisted she was too sensitive. A teacher whose long-term partner had suddenly decided he wanted children with someone younger. When it was Ava's turn, she hesitated. "I'm Ava," she said finally. "I'm recently separated. My husband had an affair." The words still tasted metallic. "But that's not even the part that hurts the most. It's realizing how much of myself I gave up before he ever left." The women nodded, not in pity, in recognition. Miss Denise leaned forward. "Baby, the worst part of betrayal isn't that they lied," she said. "It's that we went along with a smaller version of ourselves for so long, the truth feels like a foreign language." A murmur of agreement rippled through the circle. Another woman, older, with deep smile lines and tired eyes, added, "Pain isn't a competition. We've all stayed where we should have left, smiled when we should have screamed. Your broken heart is not a footnote. It matters here." For the first time since leaving Ethan, Ava felt something she hadn't known she'd been craving, being mirrored. Not as the strong therapist, not as the wife who stayed, but as a Black woman navigating love and loss in a world that already demanded so much from her. She returned the next month, and the next. In that basement, they laughed about things they weren't supposed to find funny. They cried without apologizing. They said, "I stayed because I was scared," and no one flinched. With every session of therapy and every circle meeting, Ava rebuilt herself in small, unglamorous ways. She started cooking actual meals again, not just eating crackers over the sink. She opened her curtains each morning. She played music while getting ready, old gospel her grandmother loved, R&B that reminded her of college, anything that made her body sway a little. She looked in the mirror and practiced saying, "You are not hard to love. He was just not capable of loving you well." It sounded fake at first. Over time, it started to sound like a possibility. Ava didn't wake up one morning suddenly healed. That isn't how transformation works. It wasn't a single sunrise or a single breakthrough session or a single tear finally shed in the right direction. No, her becoming unfurled in increments, quiet and stubborn, like a seed pushing through concrete. It began with the smallest shift. She stopped apologizing. Every time she began to say, "I'm sorry," she replaced it with, "Thank you for understanding," even when she wasn't sure anyone actually did. It was clumsy at first, unnatural on her tongue, but slowly the words reshaped the soil of her spirit. Work became her refuge, not because she was hiding in it, but because she remembered why she had chosen it in the first place. Helping others wasn't a burden. It was her calling. One Ethan had never taken seriously enough to deserve witnessing. Her office at Southside High, cramped and painted in unflattering beige, became the place where she felt most like herself. Students lined up outside her door, eyes swollen, shoulders heavy, anger boiling, hearts fractured. She listened. She cared without shrinking. She held space without losing herself inside their pain. One afternoon, a ninth-grade boy slumped across from her, arms crossed tightly. Ava leaned forward. "You're not stupid," she said softly. "You're hurting. There's a difference." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his gaze flickered. Recognition. Relief. The moment someone finally sees the wound, not the behavior. Ava felt her chest warm. This was her purpose, not being a prop for a man's ambition, not twisting herself into shapes meant to make someone else feel taller. After the session, she sat alone at her desk, breathing in the quiet. She hadn't felt this grounded in months. And that's when she knew survival wasn't enough. She didn't want to just get through the divorce. She wanted to grow beyond everything Ethan had minimized in her. The next week, she enrolled in a year-long trauma specialization certification. Weekend classes, intense coursework, supervision hours. It was a financial stretch and a scheduling nightmare, but when she hit submit on the application, she felt something like electricity rush through her. Dr. Rivera beamed when Ava told her. "That," she said, "is reclamation, not reaction. You're expanding into the woman you were always meant to be." Ava repeated the words silently to herself on the train ride home. Expanding. She liked the feel of it. The course challenged her immediately. The readings were dense, the clinical scenarios heavy, the practicum emotionally draining. But Ava soaked it up greedily. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't making herself small. She wasn't dimming her intellect so someone else could shine brighter. She was, finally, growing again. She joined a study group with two other women from the program. Layla, a Syrian-American counselor with quick wit and weary eyes, and Marcy, a Latina social worker who had the gift of turning every piece of pain into a story worth listening to. They bonded quickly, swapping notes, sharing snacks, laughing through exhaustion. One afternoon, after a particularly intense seminar on childhood trauma, Marcy nudged Ava. "We should work together someday," she said. "You've got that thing, the presence. When you talk, people feel safe." Ava blinked, stunned by the sincerity. "Thank you," she murmured. She had forgotten what it felt like to be affirmed without condition. In the healing circle, the women noticed the change in her too. Miss Denise pointed at her during check-in one evening and said, "You're standing taller, not just physically, spiritually." Ava felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I feel lighter." "That's because you put down what wasn't yours to carry," said Kendra, a nurse who was rebuilding after a 15-year marriage. "It was never your job to shrink to fit him." A murmur of agreement filled the room. Lighter, taller, expanding. The words were becoming a mantra she didn't even know she needed. As winter thawed into early spring, Ava made more changes, small but monumental. She bought new art for her walls, bold strokes of color Ethan would have called chaotic. She started cooking again, filling her home with spices and warmth. On Saturdays, she walked along the lake with her headphones in, letting music, real music, she told Naomi, Alicia Keys, her, Jasmine Sullivan, remind her of the fire she still carried. And then one day, she did something that surprised even her. She started singing again, softly at first, under her breath while washing dishes, then louder while cleaning, then unapologetically one morning while getting ready for work. The same songs Ethan had once mocked for being too dramatic. As her voice filled the house, she realized it. She hadn't stopped singing because she lost interest. She'd stopped because she learned to silence every part of herself that didn't fit into Ethan's curated world. But she didn't live in his world anymore. She lived in hers. The version of Ava emerging in these months was not the same woman who had walked down the aisle years ago. She was calmer, sharper, more discerning. She had learned, painfully, that love without reciprocity is not partnership, it is erosion. One evening, after a full day of practicum hours, Ava sat on her stoop, watching the sunset paint the brick buildings in shades of gold. Naomi joined her, 2 cups of hot chocolate in hand. "You're different," Naomi said. Ava smiled. "Better or worse?" "Neither," Naomi said. "Just more you." Ava looked out at the street. "I didn't realize how much of myself I'd edited out." "That's what survival looks like sometimes," Naomi replied. "But survival isn't living." Ava breathed deeply. The crisp air filled her lungs, steady and cold. She thought about the old Ava, the girl who swore she'd never lose herself in someone else's shadow. She thought about the woman who stayed too long. She thought about the version of herself now, still tender, still healing, but rising. Becoming. For the first time since her marriage ended, the future didn't feel like a punishment. It felt wide. Not empty, open. It started with a text from an unknown number, short, trembling at the edges. "Hi, Ava. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but could we meet? I need to talk to you." Ava stared at the message for a long time. Not in shock, those days were behind her, but in a quiet, assessing stillness. There was a time when seeing Sloane's name would have set her pulse racing, her stomach twisting, her mind spinning with every imaginable humiliation. Now, she simply breathed. She didn't respond immediately. She didn't owe this woman anything, and yet, something tugged at her curiosity. Not the toxic need for closure, not anymore. Something deeper. The understanding that stories don't fully release us until we face their final chapter. 6 hours later, she wrote back, "Ava, 1 hour, public place, Thursday at 3. You choose." Sloane replied with a location, a quiet cafe in a neighborhood neither of them frequented, neutral ground, a place where neither held home field advantage. On Thursday, Ava arrived early. She ordered a chamomile tea she didn't intend to drink and chose a table by the window, sunlight warm against the side of her face. There was a time she would have spent the whole morning rehearsing what to say, anticipating all the ways she might crumble or lash out. But that woman was gone. When Sloane walked through the door, Ava almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished strategist with the glossy hair and the sharp posture. This Sloane looked smaller, softer, deflated in the way people do after life punches the breath out of them. Her eyes held dark crescents beneath them, her hair pulled back without care, her clothes chosen for comfort rather than presentation. She spotted Ava, hesitated, then approached slowly. "Hi," Sloane whispered. Ava nodded. "Sit." Sloane sat. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was heavy, fraught with everything that had happened and everything they'd both lost. Finally, Sloane exhaled shakily. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Ava said truthfully. Sloane nodded, staring at her trembling hands. I guess I should just say it." Ava waited, her gaze steady but not unkind. "Ethan and I," Sloane swallowed, "we broke up." Ava didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She didn't savor the words the way she once imagined she would. "Okay," she said. Sloane blinked, surprised by the neutrality. "You're not curious why?" Ava shrugged gently. "I can guess." That startled a weak laugh out of Sloane. "Yeah, I guess you could." She wiped the corner of her eye quickly, as if ashamed of the tears. "It happened so fast," Sloane said, voice cracking. "One day he was doting, attentive. The next he was distant, cold, making subtle comments about my schedule, my priorities, how I wasn't the same." Ava's breath caught, not in pain but in recognition. The pattern, the script, the slow suffocation disguised as concern. "He found someone new," Sloane whispered, cheeks flushing. "A woman at his gym, younger, carefree. He said she inspired him, said she wasn't weighed down by life. Ava closed her eyes for a moment. It was eerie, like overhearing an old conversation she'd once lived through. He told me, Sloane continued, voice rising in disbelief, that I'd become stagnant. Me, after everything I gave, after how hard I worked to keep up with him. She let out a shaky laugh. Sound familiar? Yes, Ava said softly. Sloane looked at her then, really looked, seeing not the wife she'd replaced, but a woman who had survived the same man's emotional machinery. It wasn't about you, Ava said quietly. It wasn't about me either. Sloane bit her lip. It feels personal. It always does, Ava said. But you and I, we were mirror images in his story. He needed someone to pedestal, then someone to blame, then someone to discard. Sloane's eyes flooded. I'm so sorry, Ava, for everything, for believing him when he painted you as uninterested, for thinking I was the exception, for letting myself feel superior. Ava didn't reply immediately. She let the apology sit between them, raw and trembling. Finally, she said, You weren't the villain. You were a woman who wanted to feel chosen. Sloane covered her face, a quiet sob escaping. And now I feel like a fool. Fools don't learn, Ava murmured. But you're learning. That's why you're here. For a long time, neither woman spoke. The cafe noise swelled around them, cups clinking, a grinder whirring, soft jazz humming overhead. Sunlight shifted across their table, illuminating Sloane's tear-streaked cheeks. When she finally looked up, her voice was small. How did you survive it? Because right now I feel like I'm drowning. Ava considered the question. Then she spoke the truth. Not polished, not poetic, just honest. I didn't survive at first, she said. I collapsed. I cried until my throat burned. I forgot how to breathe. I forgot how to eat. I forgot I deserved better. Sloane nodded, tears dripping onto the table. But then, Ava continued, I remembered the women who raised me. My grandmother, my mother, my sister, the women in my healing circle. Black women who have carried entire worlds on their backs and still stand taller than the things that tried to break them. Her voice steadied. And I remembered that a man who requires your erosion to feel tall is not a man worth mourning. Sloane's breath hitched, like the words had struck something deep and aching. They said, after a moment, Sloane whispered, Do you forgive me? Ava looked at her, not as a rival, not as the woman who once stood laughing beside her husband, but as another human being shaped by the same storm. I forgive the version of you who didn't know better, Ava said gently. I don't carry anger anymore. It was too heavy. Sloane's shoulders sagged in relief. But forgiveness doesn't mean friendship, Ava added softly. It means release. For both of us. Sloane nodded, accepting the terms like someone grateful to have been offered anything at all. When the meeting ended, they stood awkwardly at the door. No hug, no promises to keep in touch, just a shared nod. An acknowledgement of two women who had walked through the same fire and come out different. As Ava stepped outside into the crisp air, she felt something subtle shift inside her chest, like the last piece of anger she'd been unknowingly carrying had finally loosened. Sloane hadn't come for closure. She'd come as proof. Proof that Ethan's behavior had never been about Ava's inadequacy. Proof that the cycle wasn't personal, it was habitual. Proof that the pain wasn't Ava's fault. A light breeze brushed her cheek. A freedom she hadn't expected settled into her bones. As she walked toward her car, Ava realized she hadn't met with Sloane to revisit the past. She had met with her to finally leave it. The email came on an ordinary Wednesday, tucked between a parent complaint and a district memo about standardized testing. Ava almost missed it. Subject line, keynote invitation, State School Counselors Conference. She clicked it, expecting a mass mailing, another generic, join us for professional development announcement. Instead, she saw her own name in the first line. Dear Miss Robinson, we followed your work at Southside High and heard about the impact you've had on your students and colleagues. This year's conference theme is Holding Space while holding yourself together. We would be honored if you'd consider delivering the opening keynote. Ava read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring softly around the edges. Keynote. Her. A year ago, she would have forwarded it to a colleague. Declined. Told herself she wasn't that kind of voice. She was the one behind the scenes, holding others together, not the one standing under bright lights. Now, she sat back in her chair and let the honor wash over her, quiet and profound. Dr. Rivera's words floated through her mind. You're expanding into the woman you were always meant to be. Maybe this was what she'd meant. A week later, Ava stood backstage in a hotel ballroom, palm pressed against her belly to steady the fluttering beneath her skin. The low murmur of hundreds of voices seeped through the curtain. Counselors, social workers, psychologists from across the state, mostly women, many black and brown, all of them weary in the way people are when they're always the strong one. She adjusted the mic clipped to her dress, fingers brushing the smooth fabric of the deep plum jumpsuit she'd chosen on purpose, soft enough to feel like herself, sharp enough to signal she was not here to apologize. Ready? The conference coordinator whispered beside her. Ava took a slow breath. Yes. When she stepped onto the stage, the chatter faded into a hush. Faces turned toward her, curious, expectant, skeptical. She recognized the look. She'd worn it herself at conferences, wondering if the person on stage would offer something real or just another polished concept that fell apart in the messy reality of their work. She didn't want to impress them. She wanted to tell the truth. She gripped the sides of the podium, then let go. No barriers, not this time. My name is Ava Robinson, she began, voice steady but warm. I'm a school-based therapist at Southside High in Chicago. I've been in this work for over a decade. A few nods, mild recognition, nothing more. And 18 months ago, she continued, my marriage ended in the most cliché, painful way you can imagine. A wave of startled silence rippled through the room. Good, she thought. Let's begin where it actually hurts. I won't give you all the details, she said, but I will tell you this. I spent years pairing my calling with a relationship that was quietly killing me. I held space for everyone, my students, their families, my colleagues, my husband, until there was none left for myself. She paused, letting the words settle. How many of you, she asked, lifting her gaze to the crowd, have sat across from a student and told them they deserve better, and then gone home to something that made you small? The reaction was palpable. Eyes dropped, shoulders stiffened. A few hands covered mouths. There it is, Ava said gently. The dissonance we don't talk about. We know how to identify toxicity in others' lives. We can spot unhealthy patterns in seconds. But when it comes to our own, we call it sacrifice, loyalty, commitment. She thought of Ethan at the gala, his hand on Sloane's back, using words like comfort zone and stagnant to explain away his betrayal. My husband, she said, loved that I was nurturing, empathetic, patient, until those same qualities made it harder for him to justify what he was doing. He told me I didn't have drive like the people in his world. He told me I'd stagnated. A bitter chuckle broke from somewhere in the audience. Ava smiled faintly. He said that as if the work we do, sitting with children who want to die, holding mothers who don't know how to reach their sons, absorbing generational trauma so it doesn't crush the next generation, wasn't work worth calling ambition. Her voice sharpened. We live in a culture that glamorizes the grind and dismisses the emotional labor that keeps communities from collapsing. She paced slowly, not hiding the tremor that ran through her. Not fear exactly. Charge. I stayed, she admitted, even when I knew he was unfaithful, even when he humiliated me publicly. I stayed because I believed my love could rehabilitate his brokenness, the same way I believed my skills could hold together broken families. She shook her head. But here's what therapy and a circle of fierce black women taught me. If the cost of keeping someone else intact is the erosion of your own soul, that is not love. That is self-abandonment. A murmur of agreement rose, low and emotional. I had to learn to do for myself what I taught my kids to do, she continued. Set boundaries, say, this hurts, and trust that was enough reason to move. Walk away from what diminishes you, even if the world praises you for enduring it. She glanced around the room, eyes shining now, not with tears of fresh grief, but with the burn of conviction. I did not heal overnight. I collapsed. I forgot who I was. I had to dig through old journals just to find the girl who once promised she'd never disappear inside someone else's story. I had to sit in therapy and say, I don't remember myself, and let another woman help me excavate the parts I'd buried. She softened her tone. I also had to admit something ugly. I had been teaching my students to value themselves more than I valued me. The silence that met that confession was thick, reverent. So today, Ava said, I'm not here to give you a checklist for self-care. You already know how to take a day off and turn your email off and listen to a podcast. I'm here to ask you a harder question. She leaned on the podium, gaze direct. What would your life look like if you treated yourself with the same fierce protection you offer your most vulnerable student? A woman in the second row lifted both hands to her face, shoulders shaking. What conversations would you stop entertaining? What apologies would you stop making? What relationships would you stop resuscitating, knowing they flatlined long ago? Her voice lowered. What would you walk away from? Not because it's easy, but because staying is killing the part of you that makes your work possible. Tears glistened across the room now, on faces of women who had stayed in loveless marriages, overcommitted jobs, one-sided friendships, women who had been asked to be everything to everyone except themselves. The night I told my husband I wanted a divorce, Ava said, I expected to feel like a failure. I expected regret. Instead, I felt air, the first full breath I'd taken in years. Not because divorce is easy, it's not. It's brutal. But because that moment was the first time I chose me without negotiating my choice through someone else's comfort. She straightened, shoulders pulled back. That is the invitation I'm extending to you. Not divorce, not drastic decisions, but the daily choice to stop abandoning yourself. Applause didn't come right away. There was a heartbeat of stillness, sacred, thick, a moment where collective recognition passed through the crowd like a current. Then the room rose. Not everyone, not all at once, but in waves. Hands collided, some women crying openly now, others nodding fiercely as if to say, finally. Someone said it out loud. Afterward, they lined up to speak to her. A counselor in her 20s whispered, I've been with someone for 3 years who doesn't clap for me when I win. I thought that was normal. I don't think it is anymore. A woman in her 50s took Ava's hands and said, voice breaking, 28 years married to a man who calls what I do cute. Your story just gave me permission to want more. Ava held each hand, met each gaze. She didn't give advice. She simply repeated the truth that had saved her. You are not hard to love. You are just asking love to meet you where it has never been required to go. Weeks later, clips from her keynote, recorded on shaky phones, circulated online. Short, imperfect videos of a Black woman on a stage saying things that sliced through performance and landed right in the soft center of people's unresolved hurt. The views climbed. Comments flooded in from other states, other countries. I watched this at 3 a.m. in my car after leaving my boyfriend's place and just sat there sobbing. Shared this with my sister, who's been a nurse for 20 years and has forgotten she matters too. Ava saw some of them, not all. Enough to understand that her pain had become, in some mysterious way, a map for others. Then, on a quiet Sunday evening while she was meal prepping for the week, her phone rang, unknown number. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and answered. Hello? Ava. The voice on the other end was familiar and distant all at once. Ethan. Every muscle in her body went still. She waited. I saw a video of your talk, he said. Someone at the firm sent it around. You're everywhere right now, apparently. He tried to chuckle. It came out thin. You talked about us, he added quickly. About me. No, Ava replied calmly. I talked about my experience. He paused. Right. Well, I've been doing a lot of thinking about how things ended, about my part in it. She said, nothing. I was hoping we could meet, he said. Talk. I owe you a real apology, not the defensive crap I gave you before. I, I'm in therapy now. I'm seeing things differently. Once, those words would have detonated hope inside her. She would have clung to them like a rope, imagining reconciliation scenes, healed futures. Now they landed like soft rain on concrete, heard, absorbed, but not life-altering. Ethan, she said, voice gentle but firm, I'm glad you're doing your work, truly, but I don't need your apology to be at peace. Silence crackled on the line. So that's it? He asked, something desperate edging into his tone. You don't even want to hear what I have to say? I've heard what I needed to, she replied. I heard it in therapy, in my healing circle, on that stage, in my own voice. That's the closure I needed, not yours. He scoffed quietly, hurt pride bleeding through. You've changed. Yes, Ava said, I have. She let that sit for a moment. We are closed, Ethan, she continued. Not bitter, not angry, just closed. I hope you heal, I really do. But your work is yours now. It doesn't get to involve me anymore. She could feel him searching for a foothold, a crack in the door. There wasn't one. Goodbye, she said softly. And this time, when she hung up, there was no shaking, no second guessing, no urge to call back. Only relief. She put her phone down, turned back to her cutting board, and resumed chopping vegetables while a playlist hummed low in the background. Her kitchen was full of mundane sounds, the sizzle of oil, the clink of a knife, her own quiet humming. Life. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just hers. True closure, she realized, wasn't a conversation with the person who broke you. It was the moment you no longer needed them to understand what they'd done in order for you to keep breathing freely. It was choosing your own story and trusting that, this time, you'd be the one holding the pen. A year after the keynote, after the divorce, the breaking, the rebuilding, Ava walked back into the restaurant where her marriage had first cracked open. Same dim lights, same polished floors, same corner table where Ethan's laughter once sliced through her like glass. But this time, Ava walked in alone. Not lonely, whole. She wore a white suit that glowed against her skin, her natural curls framing her face like a halo. Heads turned when she entered, not because she was attached to anyone, not because she was performing worthiness for a man, but because she radiated a steadiness that could not be borrowed, purchased, or faked. The hostess smiled. Table for one? Ava returned the smile, soft but certain. Yes, for one. She sat in the same seat where she'd once swallowed humiliation like poison. Only now the air felt lighter. The room felt smaller. The pain felt distant, like an old weather pattern she could describe but no longer lived under. She ordered her favorite meal. She toasted herself quietly. She didn't rush. Halfway through dinner, she opened the journal she now kept in her bag. The journal that held the letters she wrote to her past self, the notes she made during therapy, the affirmations her healing circle insisted she repeat. At the very back, a blank page waited. Ava uncapped her pen. I am not who I was when I first sat in this chair, she wrote. I am the woman who got up. I am the woman who learned her worth. I am the woman who became untouchable, not because I am hardened, but because I am finally, undeniably whole. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but from gratitude, for her grandmother's wisdom, for Naomi's fierce love, for Dr. Rivera's guidance, for every woman who held her when she forgot how to hold herself. When she left the restaurant, Ava paused at the door and looked back, not in longing, not in hurt, but in recognition. That's the night I lost everything, she whispered to herself. And that's the night I began. Outside, Chicago hummed in the cool evening air. People hurried past, streetlights flickered overhead. Life unfolded in its relentless, beautiful way. Ava stepped into the night with her shoulders squared, her chin high, her heart no longer fragile, but fortified. Not with walls, she didn't need those anymore, but with wisdom. The kind of woman who knows her worth is unshakable. The kind of woman who chooses herself becomes unstoppable. The kind of woman who has rebuilt from ashes becomes untouchable. And Ava, finally, was all three. If you felt this journey in your chest, if you saw pieces of yourself in Ava's breaking and in her rising, if her story reminded you of your own strength, like, comment, and follow this channel for more stories that heal, empower, and awaken the parts of you that refuse to stay small. You're not broken, beloved. You're breaking open. And on the other side of that opening, a woman who remembers who she is. A woman untouchable.